Welcome to the second half of the Western Michigan University College of Arts and Sciences COVID-19 Research Seminar Series. I'd like to take you back almost 10 years ago to March 11, 2011. A magnitude 9 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. The tsunami caused by that earthquake is perhaps best remembered for the nuclear accidents and meltdowns of reactors. However, the tsunami also destroyed over 100,000 buildings, partially destroyed hundreds of thousands more, and displaced hundreds of thousands of people. Sadly, more than 15,000 people lost their lives, with many more injured or missing. It's been famously stated that those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. The lead investigator of this study, Dr. Stefan Covell, chair and professor of comparative religion and an expert in Japanese religion, took the statement and turned it the other way. What can we learn from past challenges to address current and future disasters? Based on his expertise, Dr. Covell knew the work on the 2011 Japanese disaster could form the foundation for government and organizations to develop disaster response policies and plans. Using the large body of work conducted following the tsunami, his team of faculty and graduate students used initial background material to find fruitful lines of inquiry that would allow them to establish how religious organizations and policymakers responded to a crisis and can develop more effective responsive to future disasters, now using COVID-19 in the United States as the subject. The role of religious organizations in serving the affected in response to disasters is one aspect, as is other activities of religious organizations, such as their effects on stay-at-home orders. This team from the department, including Dr. Covell, Dr. Diane Riggs, Faculty Specialist 2, and graduate student Cameron Borg, are using WMU's ScholarWorks platform to curate data on the responses of religious organizations for both their own research and to facilitate the work of others around the world. This will allow us to understand aspects of the COVID-19 response here in the United States. Drs. Covell and Riggs and Mr. Borg will be presenting Pandemic Response and Religion in the United States.
I want to begin my talk today with a confession. I'm a professor of Japanese religions. I'm not a professor of religion in America, nor am I an expert on infectious diseases. I've spent most of my career working on a variety of issues related to the development of Buddhism in modern Japan. Of course, that work included issues like how changes in law affect the practice of religion, and how politics can shape the way in which people are able to gather and worship. And I've also worked on issues related to religion and health in Japan, centered on self-cultivation practices. So I'm not entirely a fish out of water when it comes to this topic. When the pandemic broke out, it was immediately clear to all of us in the Department of Comparative Religion here at WMU that religious practice would be affected and that religious organizations would play a role in how people responded to the pandemic. With that in mind, as chair of the department, I worked with my colleague, Dr. Diane Riggs, and a group of dedicated graduate students, including Gerald Brooks, Jarrett Stallinger, Korea Randolph, Ryan LeMasters, Emily Warren, and Cameron Borg, to see what we could do to increase our understanding of how the pandemic affected religion in the United States and how religion affected the politics of the pandemic and other issues. The goal of our project was not to produce definitive research right away. Rather, the goal of our project was to gather and catalog as many of the various articles, blogs, videos, and other materials that were being produced, so that we could, and along with others, go back to this hopeful treasure trove of material for future research. We're still in the process of gathering and sorting and posting this material. And unfortunately, the ongoing nature of the pandemic has meant the original plan of gathering materials during the pandemic has become a sadly sort of endless project. In addition to the goal of archiving and cataloging the many hundreds, if not thousands, of news articles and Facebook posts and other similar material that was appearing online throughout the pandemic, we also sought to create teaching modules that could be used by ourselves and other scholars and teachers to teach about the pandemic and its effect on religion in the United States. This is because an important part of our graduate program here at WMU is training our students to be effective teachers of religious studies. Religion deals with many aspects of human life that can arouse great passion. Religion shapes the worldviews of people. As such, it can be a very positive, a very sensitive and difficult topic to teach appropriately. We knew that religion would play a significant role in how people understood and reacted to the pandemic, and we also knew that government orders and various policies would have a significant impact on the practice of religion. And we knew it was going to be important to teach about this in a critical and yet sensitive manner. And this is what led us to developing the teaching modules. The modules are still being wrapped up, but once they are complete, we plan on posting them on our website for public use. Dr. Riggs will talk more about the teaching modules in just a little bit. What I would like to discuss now is the website that we've put together and that we believe will be very useful for teachers and scholars going forward. The website address is a little long, but I have it here on the screen. I highly recommend taking some time and clicking your way through it and checking out what we have there. Just in case, the site is scholarworks.wmich.edu/religion-pandemic. And this next slide will show you what the landing page looks like with the different categories that I'll talk about in just a moment. I have to admit, part of the joy of working on this was not simply learning so much about religion in the pandemic and politics of the pandemic in the United States. It was also learning about this unique tool, ScholarWorks. What we've done is cultivated a collection of well over 700 links to articles and videos and other materials. Wherever possible, we've also included PDFs of the articles. We're still in the process of seeking permissions from the authors of many of the hundreds and hundreds of sites that we've linked to so that we can post PDFs of their material as well. That way, even if the links go bad, we'll always have a searchable hard copy of what was there. Many of the authors have been quite generous in allowing us to post PDFs of their material. As we posted links to articles and the like on our webpage, we also created abstracts for each item linked. As you can see from the data shown here, those abstracts have been accessed over 6,000 times so far, making them one of the most, if not the most, accessed sites, set of materials on WMU's ScholarWorks platform. In addition to creating abstracts, which by the way is something we're far behind on, we think we've created roughly 400 abstracts or so far, and we need to do roughly another 400 or more to get caught up. We've also created a set of categories under which we have placed the relevant links to articles. Our hope in doing this was to make it easier for scholars and others to find material that they're interested in. So for example, if you're interested in how ritual has played a role in the manner in which people respond to the pandemics, or how ritual has been affected by the pandemic, then you can click on the category for ritual to look for relevant videos and articles. And this slide here shows that category once you've clicked there. The categories we use relate closely to standard categories within the academic field of religious studies, and you can see these listed on this next slide. The categories include doctrine, education, ethics, health, law and public policy, material culture, race, ethnicity, and gender, religious community and life, and ritual. These categories, we hope, will also make this a useful site for instructors to send their students to when assigning them research on the pandemic. For example, a teacher could ask students to debate the relationship between race, religion, and the pandemic, and have their students find news articles and other materials to argue their positions by clicking on the race, ethnicity, and gender category. And on this next slide, you can see an example of one of the postings that a student might find. As you can see on the slide, it lists the title of the article. It has some other material, background material on the article. If there's an abstract posted for it by us, the abstract is up there as it is in this case. And then you can see at the top corner, there's a link. You click that link and it takes you to the original article. And then below that, you see another thing that says Plumx Metrics. And I'll talk a little bit more about the metrics button in just a moment. Cameron Borg, our lead graduate student on this project, will discuss some of the trends he's seeing in the materials we're collecting in just a bit. But before he does, I wanted to mention one of the really neat things we found as we began uploading material to the ScholarWorks site. The site provides data on usage of anything posted there. This is something that we weren't expecting. It's perhaps as part of our learning curve with a new system. But we're gathering data on how often various materials that we post are being used. The metrics provided track use of the posted material outside of its posting on our website. In other words, we can learn from looking at the metrics that a particular YouTube video has been accessed 1,000 times. This doesn't mean necessarily that people have accessed our site 1,000 times to view the video, but that doesn't matter so much as now we know how many times different articles and videos and other materials are being accessed. And we can also tell where they're being accessed from. Although not the subject of current research, we feel that this data may provide some very interesting insights into the different mediums, how they're used, how often they're accessed. And it's clear from looking at this data which types of news articles or video postings are getting the most traction, the most views and the most clicks. And therefore, perhaps we can learn from this about what draws people in and what mediums people use to access the information on this topic. Here's one example of what I mean. And you can see on this, when you're looking at the material there, you can look down, find a particular article, find how many usages it has, and it'll say 15,000 usages or something like that, and then there'll be details broken down into where it's used, how it's used, social media, citations, those sorts of things. That's a very useful data. And we're also able to gather data on where people are accessing the material from. So on this next slide, you can see, and this applies only to the downloads, so downloads of PDFs and material that we've uploaded. But from this next slide, you can see all the places around the world, a total of 53 countries where the material has been downloaded to. The largest is the US. There's 2 out in Mongolia, a couple over in Korea. They're being accessed all around the world. And then you can drill down further and look at the specific country and that data, and that's on this next slide. And as you look at that specific country, it'll drill down even further into what material is being accessed in that country. So you can tell how many times different articles are downloaded in different countries. And then another bit of information that you can drill down into, should you so desire, is institutional access. So there have been over 20 different institutions that have accessed the material that we've posted, everything from Beijing Normal University to, if I'm reading this right, the United States Air Force has downloaded material. And that's on this slide here as well. This isn't something we initially expected to find or to learn about, but the system we've chosen to use, ScholarWorks, has provided all this material. So in addition to being able to find videos and articles and other materials on religion and the pandemic on the website, by clicking through on that metrics link, you can also learn where those articles are being downloaded, how many times they're being accessed, where they're being accessed, how they're being accessed. So it's an interesting and useful, I hope, set of data. So that's the general background of the project. We've put together this site with all this material that we're trying to share with everybody. And then we're putting together these teaching modules. Next up is Cameron Borg. He's our next speaker. And Cameron is a graduate student in the Department of Comparative Religion. He studies religion and health in India. And he was tasked with uploading the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of links to our ScholarWorks site, and also with writing many of the hundreds of abstracts. And because of his familiarity with the material, we've asked him today to talk about the trends he's seen. So Cameron, the floor is yours.
So working on this project not only has taught me and everyone else who's worked on it skills as a researcher, but it's also taught us how this pandemic has really impacted the lives of groups and individuals, specifically in the realm of religion. As has been said earlier, we are working on a database that can be found on Western Michigan University's ScholarWorks page. Our page is called Pandemic Response and Religion in the USA. And that can be found under the Comparative Religion Department when you go to Western Michigan's ScholarWorks page. So our main focus in this database has been articles and materials based on religious groups, primarily in the Midwest. However, we have looked at different groups and religions on both national and international levels. So today I'm going to talk about some trends we've seen in the research. Just for time's sake, we found many trends, but I'm going to talk about the 3 biggest. But before I dive into these trends, as Dr. Covell mentioned earlier, our database is divided into the categories of doctrine, education, ethics, health, law and public policy, material culture, race, ethnicity, gender, religious community, and ritual. So if someone, such as a teacher, student, researcher, or anyone wanted to investigate a particular trend, it can be found under the appropriate category. But it should be important to note that many of our sources and articles that we found can be located under multiple categories. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the three biggest trends that we found in our research. And the three biggest trends are ritual, or they're related to ritual, religious life, and the tension that's going on right now between many governments and many religious groups. So to start, we'll talk about ritual. Ritual can be found in every religion and in every culture. However, due to social distancing restrictions, many religious groups and individuals are not able to partake in these rituals the way that they normally have for such a long time. They're not able to meet in person or meet in groups. So many religions and people of these religions are having to adapt. They're having to continue these rituals in a way they're not used to, whether it's virtually or in some other creative manners that I'll give here in a minute. So yeah, we have a couple examples, and this first example I'd like to give involves a Michigan priest from the Detroit area named Father Peck. Every year at Easter, he would bless Easter baskets with holy water. So last Easter, the pandemic was still kind of a new thing. He had to adapt. So what he did is, in his attire, and he was all masked up and everything, he stood outside his church, and with a water spray gun filled with holy water, his congregation would drive by in their cars, roll down their window, and he would spray holy water through their car windows and onto their baskets. So that was one cool creative way. We have countless other examples of how different groups have adapted over a variety of different religions. And the second example that I'd like to give, this is an example that's more related to probably what we think of when we're thinking of how people adapt ritual, and that is adapting via virtual means. And the biggest example that we found is there is a Facebook page that's referenced in many articles, and we've also linked the Facebook page on our ScholarWorks site, but it is called the Social Distance Powwow. And it is a Facebook group dedicated to keeping members of a variety of First Nation and Native American groups just connected, just in community, and just to make sure that no one gets lonely, to make sure that people know that there's people out there for them to talk to, there's different resources for them. But also this page, the biggest part of this Facebook page is that they feature via video things such as powwows, jingle dress dances, and other rituals. They feature these rituals via video and post them on the Facebook page so that members that aren't able to attend these types of rituals can still embrace the experience. So yeah, we have many sources on this Facebook page. If anyone's interested, it's very interesting. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second trend. The second trend involves religious life. Now, just to be clear, when I say religious life, I'm referring to monastic life, which can be seen primarily in Christianity and Buddhism through monks and nuns. And the primary trend we have seen in religious life is the increase in COVID-19 cases among monks and nuns in their private, enclosed communities, whether it's at a monastery or a convent. And in addition, though, this increase in COVID cases that we have found, so there's two parts to this trend. The second part of the trend is that the increase in COVID cases has led to an increase in the adaptation of the monks and nuns' daily life. The thing about monastic life is that monks and nuns follow a very strict schedule, and it's typically the same every day with some variation. However, because they're so close in community, they've had to adapt, obviously, because there's been, a pandemic outbreak worldwide, but we're finding that there have been major outbreaks in monasteries and convents because of how close these communities are. Other archives in our database are more applicable to the adaptation and response of monks and nuns. And an example of this can be, we have featured, it's called the Tibetan Nuns Project, and it is a website that details convents and monasteries in the Tibetan region and how they have adapted their various rituals along with their daily life in the COVID-19 pandemic. And on this website, there are a variety of different convents and monasteries you can pick from, so you can look and specifically see how each group is adapting their monastic life. Our database features links to other articles that describe the response of monks and nuns that's closer to us, like in the Midwest. For example, we have a couple articles and links to the Poor Clare Sisters from Minnesota. It is a Catholic group of nuns who, because of many outbreaks in other convents, they have taken action and steps to increase social distancing within their very private and intimate groups, but also adapting their rituals while trying to keep to their daily life and schedule as best as they can. All right, so now we're on to the final trend that we found. The third and probably the biggest trend that we found is the continuous tension between religious groups and the government. Now, before I continue, I should be clear, many religious groups and individuals are complying with government regulations. However, as evident in the evidence we have gathered, there are some groups and individuals who are experiencing tension with the government around the ideal of religious freedom. So the first example, the first couple examples I'd like to talk about are international examples. And then we'll make it a little more relevant. We'll talk about more Midwest examples in a couple minutes. So in our database, the response to COVID-19 by many religious groups and governments has been archived. And many of these examples demonstrate a combination of fake news, xenophobia, and religious discrimination has played a role in terms of placing the blame on the spread of COVID-19. A lot of times this blame gets placed on minority groups or outside groups. And one example includes the spread of fake news blaming Muslims in India for the spread of COVID-19. The spread of this fake news has led to the persecution of many Muslims in India and other places around the world. A second example that we archived is the tension between the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christian Church in Russia, and the Russian state around religious freedom. Religious freedom has been a sensitive topic in Russia ever since the Soviet Union, or the time of the Soviet Union. But this issue has resurfaced much more since the Russian state has enacted many social distancing policies due to our current pandemic. And there are many more international examples that demonstrate this tension that can be found in our database. We have countless examples. I would say our law and public policy category is probably the largest category on our page. And not all of it includes the tension. Some of it even includes like how governments and religious groups have worked together. But many of our sources do involve the tension. So aside from international examples, we have gathered many instances in the United States, particularly the Midwest. The first example I'd like to talk about includes our own governor, Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We have archived several instances of lawsuits and other conflicts between religious groups and Governor Whitmer. Most of the tension involves her past executive orders and social distancing policies. With this particular conflict or tension, we have found a split trend. There are many religious groups who oppose the actions of Governor Whitmer and have taken their own action, whether in the form of noncompliance or lawsuits. However, we have also found that there are many religious groups who agree with Governor Whitmer's policies, and a few that don't agree but have still chosen to comply with government policies regardless. So all the different examples that I just mentioned, these are all prevalent in our ScholarWorks database. So you can just find this example, many examples about Governor Whitmer, but then we have many other examples of different governors throughout the United States and the different issues that they've experienced. We have a lot of examples from California, Michigan, New York, and Texas. Many other states too, but those four we had many examples from. In addition to archiving, so as I mentioned, in addition to archiving instances of tension between religious groups and our own governor, We have archived religious political tensions in a variety of other states as well. And one state that I didn't mention in the four that I just mentioned is the state of New York. The state of New York and New York City is found all over our database. We have many articles and websites that are detailing just different tensions going on in the city and in the state, but also different guidelines given out by the health department in the state of New York as to how religions should go about continuing to worship amidst social distancing guidelines. So yeah, as I mentioned, countless more examples can be found on our ScholarWorks page. Our ScholarWorks page is divided into several categories, but if you're interested, you can easily find these trends just by going into our database and just searching for what interests you. So yeah, thank you.
In this section of the video conference, my job is to discuss with you how we can use the religious responses to the pandemic database to create teaching modules. These modules can be used for undergraduates in college, and they can also be used for, potentially they could be used for graduate students as well, but they can also be used in high school in a variety of different kinds of courses. It's a great resource. This database that we've created can be used for individual research, of course. That provides source material for a variety of fields, also for the comparative studies of religion, and for cultural and historical studies. As Cameron Borg explained in his section, the database is organized by topics that range widely across sociological, psychological, political, and cultural issues. The articles and media themselves have a wide variety of approaches. In other words, they introduce various kinds of methodology. But how do you adapt the richness of this database to teaching? How do you introduce students to the methodological issues and problem solving that the materials raise? In this part of the video conference, I offer some approaches that makes this material more accessible and will give students a sense of accomplishment as they work with it. First thing you need to do is to create a framework. The database of religious responses to the pandemic is organized roughly under topic categories, but the articles and other media often cover more than one of the established categories. So we had to choose which category to place the article or the media in, but many of them covered lots of different categories. For example, an article on ritual bathing in conservative Judaism also reflects on gender, agency, and restrictions imposed by the government. So to create a successful teaching module, the instructor must first choose an approach or a method, and then select materials that highlight that approach. And this can include materials from other categories in the database, but it can also include materials outside of the database to give a framework of historical or methodological focus. By shaping the materials this way, the instructor is actually demonstrating research methods to the students. And you can make this more obvious to the students or less obvious. So let's look at two sample approaches that I created. The first approach uses historical documents to bring out issues of religion, politics, and culture. The lesson focus is on the U.S. Constitution. This provides, through the First Amendment, protection for the practice of religion, speech, and assembly. So in this module, we would introduce students to reading the First Amendment as a historical document. And the actual original document, and then learning and analyzing interpretations of the First Amendment that apply in this case. And this would be could be a historical study of the different ways that this amendment has been interpreted, or you can just choose some contemporary commentators on it. And then the second part of the approach is to apply what students learn to the interpretation of the First Amendment in specific circumstances. So here's where you start using the database to look at how people understood the First Amendment as it applied to their own particular situation. So the lesson plan for the historical document approach is, in part one, students prepare for class by reading, before they come to class, the First Amendment of the Constitution and a few selected relevant interpretations of the First Amendment that the instructor has created. In the first part of the unit, students and teacher focus on the primary text, learning what it says and thinking about how the amendment has been interpreted. The discussion in class should establish 4 or 5 main issues that they want to pursue in the second part of the class. For the next class, students will search the database for articles that address one or of these main issues and prepare an outline to be handed in for credit. In part 2 of this unit, in the next class, the instructor gives a brief introduction and brings students back up to speed, and then the students themselves break up into 4 or 5 small groups discussing the issue that they researched. In the final 30 minutes of the class, each discussion group reports on the interpretation of the First Amendment that were relevant to the materials that they looked at. Now, this lesson plan can be adapted to a lot of different courses. It would be very useful in history, social studies, and psychology, and of course, comparative religion. But what it does is it allows students to think about what are historical documents and how do you interpret them? How do you use them in contemporary life when they were written maybe 200-300 years ago? So it's a practice session in how to use original texts. The second approach that I'd like to discuss is analyzing the problems of ritual during the pandemic. And this is a different kind of topic, a different kind of methodology. The lesson focus for this would be to think about how in 2020 the COVID-19 pandemic, with its restrictions affecting in-person gatherings, affected religious services. Religious ritual, which by its nature involves material objects and the presence of people in various functional roles, was a more difficult problem to solve. In other words, it's more difficult to do it remotely or online because you don't have the physical objects there, you don't have the authorities doing the action. So some groups found solutions by using digital online resources to practice religious ritual. Some of these practices had already been established, however, in the preceding 10 years before the pandemic. But now they became more mainstream. In other words, there was already a community that was doing religious ritual online and had set up parameters for how to deal with the physicality of ritual and the question of authority. So online ritual practices must address both the purpose and the characteristics of ritual. How is it different in person from doing it online? It also must address the challenges and problems of online ritual without physical presence. In part 1 of the lesson, in the first class, the students prepare before coming to class by reading Ninian Smart's 7 Dimensions of Religion. This gives students an understanding of 7 different ways that religious action is taken. Heidi Campbell's Digital Religion, Understanding Religious Practice in New Media Worlds has a chapter entirely devoted to online digital ritual. And it's very helpful in sorting out the differences between doing a ritual online and doing a ritual in person. And finally, the instructor should create an outline of defining characteristics of religious ritual and use this as a focus document for these other materials. Students discuss these reading materials and identify specific issues about ritual practice during the pandemic. And the discussion is then summarized into 4 or 5 main issues, again, during the last 15 minutes. Students then prepare for next class by finding relevant articles in the database, bringing in outlines of main points. In the second part of the unit, in the next class, after a brief introduction, students break up into 4 or 5 small groups to discuss the issue that they researched. And then at the end, the class discusses as a whole how their sources demonstrated the problem-solving situations where physical presence in ritual is restricted. What groups sought creative solutions? Which ones ignored the prohibitions and met in person? Because that's also part of the picture. What justifications did these groups use? What are the advantages and disadvantages of this new style of doing ritual? And how do the students think it will affect in-person gatherings after the pandemic danger is over? So in this teaching unit, you're really looking at the future, not the past, but how will the pandemic changes to ritual affect the future? It introduces students to the parameters of religious ritual, and it shows them how to think about the interrelatedness of ritual in religion and human culture. So as you can see, the database is a very successful tool for introducing students to specific issues in religion and culture and history, and it develops a certain skill in their ability to analyze and think about problem solving.
Almost there. Hello, and welcome to the question and answer session for our talk today on pandemic response and religion in the United States. I'd like to start by saying I'd have such a question right now that I'm asking Cameron to look at after this, Dr. Covell, which is the priest with the squirt gun was very creative. I'll be curious to see what he did for Ash Wednesday yesterday. And how do you do a ritual like those ashes at a distance? So, but all fun aside, I think that it is a really interesting question of this has been going on for a while. So you'll see potentially a full year of religious ritual reflected through the pandemic.
Yes, I believe these a number of the changes that we're seeing are going to be long-lasting, and for a number of reasons. In part because people like we are, like here at the university, where we're starting to learn to do webinars and to translate what we do into an online format. I think in many ways it's going to be similar in different religious groups. They're going to start to learn to, and they are learning, they're succeeding in finding new ways to reach out to communities and do the rituals and the like that they need to do.
So another question is that you had originally started out looking at the United States, but you included more non-US materials in your archive. What was the thought behind that, and how do you think it will impact the ability to use this for future research?
We had initially hoped or thought we'd be focusing primarily on the US, and even within the US here on what was going on in Michigan. but there was just so much material coming out and so much very interesting material coming out that we just sort of kept expanding the types of material we're bringing in. Unfortunately, we are limited in that the material that we're bringing in is all English language material. So that is one limit to the database. So even though we've been adding a fairly significant amount of material from sites around the globe, it is still limited to English language materials, which hopefully will be useful for the other side of things that we're looking to do with this, which is on the one hand, this is to create a database for people to access so they can carry out research. On the other hand, it's also to create a database for teachers in the US at colleges and possibly at high schools to be able to access the material and assign it in class.
So speaking of this US and international, while we're limited to English documents, from what you've seen, are there any trends between the US and the world in terms of the tension between religious groups and organizations and the government, or is it limited to certain political systems, et cetera?
It's definitely a worldwide trend. So the types of tension between governments and religions in their reaction to the pandemic obviously varies from country to country due to legal structures as well as cultural structures. So there are differences here in the U.S. The First Amendment plays a role in how people see religious institutions acting within the pandemic, and other countries may not have similar constitutional guarantees and laws based off of those guarantees. But we do see similar things. There was just a really interesting article that we'll be posting the link to on the site as well that came up in the New York Times yesterday on the Orthodox Jewish community in Israel. And there's in addition to ritual impacts, there's also politics involved in that there's questions of their ability to gather in mass groups might be something that's linked to the political power of their organizations. So they're able to do things perhaps that others might not be able to do. So it's, yes, all around the world, there's this tension between government policy, legal structures, and religious institutions.
The other thing that I think people think about with a pandemic, with the economic impact of the pandemic, the fact that people are not often in person in the religious organizations. Have you seen yet any information on the economic impact of the pandemic? Because it seems like a great area for research as well, for people not just in comparative religion, which is obviously a rich area of research, but in economics and public policy.
There hasn't been, in the material we've been collecting, I haven't seen as much on the economic impact on religious institutions, but it's clear there is and there will be. Your ability to interact with the public it plays a very big role in your ability to collect donations and other forms of income, and as that is inhibited by the various restrictions in place, that makes it much more difficult for religious organizations to do the kind of fundraising that they're used to. So I think, yes, I think there is a definite economic impact there, and I think that's something that we'll see, again, also going forward, having an impact on religious institutions.
Thank you. So our time here is starting to run out, but the one thing that we want to know about is, when will this resource run out? How long will this be available for the community as people hear this seminar and learn about your resource in order to do their research on the COVID-19 impacts for the future?
So this is as permanent as WMU, I'd like to hope. So it's hosted on our library websites. It's through the ScholarWorks organization, which we're a member of, and we hope to keep it there as long as we can, and we continue to add. So the initial span was 1 year of collecting, or less. It was not supposed to be 1 year. It was supposed to be a few months of collecting data, and then the pandemic was going to go away, and it's still here. So we're still collecting, and we will still be collecting and adding. So please avail yourself of the the material on the website now and into the future.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say, Dr. Covell, that this is a resource that will promote a lot of really interesting research, not only here at WMU, but we're really hoping across the country and the world. And so on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences and Western Michigan University, I'd like to thank Dr. Covell and his team for sharing their work with us today and with you for joining us. And I encourage you to go to the website, which you can see on the YouTube page, to learn more about this resource and use it to advance your own work. Have a great day.